Now, there's a very interesting article in Reuters, which is a British news agency, and which tends to follow very closely whatever line the British government are taking. They actually did some good reporting. They talked to people in the Russian oil industry, and they found those people in the Russian oil industry intensely relaxed about this latest set of sanctions. And the point these people have been making is that for some time now, Russia has been transferring its oil eastwards to Asia. Already, it seems, by the end of last year, Asia had actually become a bigger buyer of Russian oil than Europe. So that's already a significant reversal. But this is now building up. It's increasing. And of course, they're selling oil to China, not directly through the big Chinese state companies, but through various Chinese private companies. I think this is the kind of thing that the Chinese do. As I said, there's always vast numbers of different companies in China that can be slotted in to buy Russian products. They don't trade in the US. They're not involved in US trade. So they're not really worried if they're sanctioned, because that doesn't really concern them. But, the Chinese are buying more Russian oil in that way. And of course, India is now becoming a major buyer of Russian oil. And some rather curious things are starting to happen, because India is now becoming an exporter of refined oil products to the EU. Now, how is it doing that? How is India able to export refined oil products, diesel, petrol, whatever, to the EU? Well, I'm going to guess that it's doing it because it's importing oil from Russia. Probably quite a lot of it is crude. It's refining it. Perhaps some of that is being exported to Europe, though that might be a bit controversial. Or perhaps it's displacing other Indian oil products, refined oil products with India, which the Indians are then able to export. But anyway, whatever the exact process, it means that India is becoming a middleman, a key middleman. It's able to supply Europe with oil because it is importing more from Russia. Now, at the same time, within the European Union itself, you have these very complicated and very confusing sanctions. Hungary, other countries can continue to receive oil through the Druzhba pipeline. It only affects shipborne oil. Be prepared for the fact that more oil is going to be delivered through this pipeline than has been the case up to now. I understand it still has spare capacity. So it was supplying around a third of the oil that Russia was exporting to Europe, but I suspect that will increase, and it will be about half of what Russia was exporting to Europe a few months ago, last year, for example. But at the same time, what's happening is you're going to start getting imbalances. So you're going to get cheaper oil in Hungary, more expensive oil in Germany, because it's a single market. It will mean that German refiners will take oil from Hungary and import it into Germany, where it's more expensive. So we're going to have an unstable market in Europe for oil. We're no longer going to have a single market. And what's going to actually happen is you're going to start to see Hungarian importers of Russian oil re-exporting oil to Germany as well. So it's going to be incredibly disorganized. And it's not clear at the moment how long this pipeline will be allowed to continue supplying oil to the EU. There doesn't seem to be any terminal date. Ursula von der Leyen is talking about the EU stopping imports, 90% of imports of Russian oil by the end of the year. But of course, what she could be talking about is shipborne oil. If oil is still leaking into Germany from Hungary because it's coming through the pipeline, or Serbia, or other places, Slovakia, wherever. And of course, it's also being supplied by tankers from India, refined oil from India. Then the reality is that this oil ban might not be all that it seems, and far from being 90% of Russian oil that's been stopped, the movements of which have been stopped, it may be far less than that. Now, there's been another twist, and it goes directly to a point that you made a couple of days ago, about a week ago, when we were talking about this issue, which is about Greece and the fact that the Greek ship owners carved out a sanctions exemption so that they can still tank up on Russian oil, on their tankers, and that they can ship it around the world. Well, the EU, having granted Mitsotakis and the Greeks that carve out, are now, with another hand, trying to take it back, because they're trying to persuade, well, they will arrange for British insurers to deny insurance cover to tankers that are shipping Russian oil. So the idea is to deny insurance to tankers, which will, of course, the idea is that will stop Russian oil being shipped around the world. Now, the thing to say about that is, firstly, it's very typical of the way the EU behaves. You think you've got a concession from them, they give it with one hand, and they take it back with the other. So, Mitsotakis and the Greek ship owners perhaps ought to note that fact, that what Mitsotakis thought he had achieved, he didn't actually achieve. But the reality is that, put that all aside, it's not going to work anyway, because the days when London dominated the maritime insurance market, where pretty much every ship was insured by Lloyd's of London, that was the situation in this, right up until, well, almost the 1980s. I mean, I just got the tail end of it. I remember working and, in law, and at that time it was still the case, this is at the 80s, that most ships were still getting their insurance cover in London from Lloyd's. Well, those days have gone. London is still the biggest player in maritime insurance, but of course other players have now appeared on the scene, especially as London insurance, Lloyd's itself, became compromised with the corruption scandal back in the 80s and 90s, and has greatly fallen in scale. I mean, it's a shadow of what it was. But the more insurance has become politicized as well, the British have tried to weaponize their control of maritime insurance. And as the center of gravity in shipping has moved to Asia, well, Asian insurers now exist. China does a lot of its own insurance work for its fleets, its merchant ships, and of course Russia does too. So it doesn't work. And bear in mind, if you are shipping oil from Russia to India, you can get Russian insurance cover to do that. Once that oil arrives in India and gets refined there, it can then be reshipped to Europe by a Greek tanker. And of course, that's shipping Indian oil, supposedly, to Europe. So, of course, any restrictions on insurance on Russian oil don't apply any longer. Again, I'm simplifying, but that's the way this is going to happen. So this oil ban, it's got more holes in it than a Swiss cheese. It's not going to work. It shows a fundamental misunderstanding of the way the oil market works. And in the case of the British, with this idea about denying insurance, and in the case of the EU as well, I think once more they're assuming that the world is still as it was 30 years ago when the Cold War ended. They haven't caught up with the fact that the world is bigger and much more complicated, with far more players than used to be the case.
I mean, they understand this, the EU, and that's why they're also saying now that they're going to place tariffs on Russian oil if certain EU countries decide to circumvent the sanctions. So I imagine the Greek shippers understand that they're going to be able to circumvent the sanctions, and other countries are going to be able to do certain things to get that Russian oil. So is the EU's game plan all along to just kind of get this oil embargo as a PR stunt to announce it, but they know on the back end of things that they'll just be able to put tariffs on the imports?
I don't know. And, nothing would surprise me, but just consider what a crazy thing that is. Because announcing that you're going to put tariffs on Russian oil imports after you've supposedly banned Russian oil imports is already an admission that that ban on Russian oil imports isn't going to work, that people are going to disregard and ignore it and find ways around it. So why not, if that's your plan, if that's your backup plan, why not go to the black backup plan? Why go on? Why go ahead with this oil import idea, if or oil import ban idea, if you're already preparing for the fact that it's going to fail? I mean, bear in mind that every country, Greek ship owners, the Greek government, the Maltese government, the Cyprus government, the big Norwegian oil shippers, the Danes, all of these people now are going to know in advance that if they simply ignore these sanctions, then the EU will simply drop them and will go for something else. And so, I mean, that's almost, if you like, an invitation to all of these people. And we're talking about very tough minded, hard nosed people. It's almost an invitation to them to test this oil ban and, in effect, to undermine it. So that's already a crazy thing. Now, is it because the oil ban was just a PR stunt and was never intended seriously? Or is it because, having got her oil ban, Ursula comes back triumphant to Brussels, and then she meets her officials and they all explain to her some of the things that we've been discussing on this program, that this oil ban has more holes than a Swiss cheese and is unenforceable and is going to create distortions in the oil market. And she understands this now, so she comes up with plan B. But whichever it is, it's incredibly unimpressive. It already indicates to the market, which is the place where these things matter, to the actual players out there in the oil shipping industry, which is one of the most sophisticated and complex in the world, that the EU has imposed a ban on imports of Russian oil that it doesn't believe in itself. So, I mean, it's just crazy. It shows how absurd this whole situation has become.
When are we going to see oil for rubles?
Oh, I think very soon. I think it's only a question of time. Already the Russians are talking about wheat for rubles. I mean, it's we were talking about that. It's actually happening, and they've now come up with this incredibly incendiary package, which I gather has the U.S. Treasury really spooked. There's already apparently been arguments about whether to press ahead with more sanctions within the administration, with the Treasury now arguing against more sanctions because they're saying that this has gone far enough and it's going to cause real damage. But the Russians are now coming up with this reverse gas for rubles scheme. They need to pay, or rather, they want to pay their foreign creditors, the people who own bonds in, Russian bonds. The US has been trying to stop those bond payments. So what the Russians are proposing is this: look, we can't pay you anymore through JP Morgan and all the rest. So why don't you do what the gas importers in Europe are doing? Open two accounts in Gazprom Bank, one a ruble account, one a dollar account. So what we will do is we need to pay you. So we will pay rubles for the amount of your interest into your ruble account. Gazprom Bank will then convert those rubles into dollars, and then we'll pay those dollars to you. So you'll get paid. We will pay you in rubles, but you will get dollars. Now, that is already a further step towards the internationalization of the ruble, if you think about it. And of course, it circumvents the whole, idiotic idea. I think it's idiotic. I cannot understand the logic of it, of the US trying to stop payments by a foreign government to US bondholders. In order to get this symbol, this symbolic token of a Russian default, which no one in the market takes seriously because it's been imposed artificially. So we have gas for rubles. We're going to have gas for wheat. We're going to have these arrangements that I've just described for the Russians to pay off their bondholders. And I can't see why some of them, who presumably want their money, wouldn't agree to this. And before very long, we're going to have oil for rubles too. And the next step, and where it will really begin to become dangerous, is if third parties start involving themselves in this. If, say, India, we're talking about India. I'm not saying India will do this, but just imagine if India is now buying products increasingly from Russia, and it says to the EU is running into oil shortages, and they say, look, we've got to have rubles. It's very complicated for us to convert our currency into rubles. It's very complicated for us to convert your euros into rubles. So why don't you just pay us rubles for the oil you need from us? And, if other oil producers, if other grain producers, if gas producers start to move into that position, well, we're in a completely different world. The ruble is an internationally traded currency. It becomes the strongest currency in the world. And, Zoltan, what's his name? The Hungarian person who's been going around, Pojdar, who talks about the fact that we're moving into a new world of commodity-based currencies. Well, he has one. He'll be proved right.